Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to our conversation. I'm Colm. I'm a youth ministry coordinator here at St. Anne's. And as per usual, good sir,
I'm Father Matthew. I'm the pastor here at St. Anne's.
good to see you.
You too.
It's been a few days, and we had junior youth last night, and
Oh, yeah.
the kids came up to me and they're like, "You gave up hair for Lent," because I buzzed my hair, and they're like, "Is that a Lent thing?" I was like, "It's not." But I think it is. Like I just started to think the last couple of years
Lent,
that I seem to always buzz my head around Lent. I don't know if there's like some biblical thing going on there,
I
but
think you're not supposed to get your hair biblically.
it's, anyway, yeah, that's fun. It's more that I like wearing toques and not having to worry and whatever. COVID's just simpler to buzz your hair. Anyways.
How does short hair protect you from COVID?
I don't leave my house. I don't know. It's
Okay.
just no. I'm stretching. It's just convenience.
That's fair.
Pure convenience.
But you had a bit of an adventure. You thought you would
Yeah.
share with our crew.
Yeah.
here.
So it was. I don't know if we mentioned on the podcast that I very what I call stupid tax wrecked my car a few weeks ago. Maybe I
I
mentioned
don't
it.
remember if it mentioned.
Anyways, so yeah, I needed to replace a commuter car, and we found one out in kind of your old neck of the woods.
And
So our whole family.
I was pastor in Corroborate before I came to St. Anne's. Lived there for 3 years.
Yeah.
So wonderful little town, great people.
Usually, most Mondays, sometimes I'm taking off a little bit because we're doing evening stuff, and so the whole family packed in the van, and we road tripped out to Corroborate
Okay.
on Monday, and yeah, picked up a little vehicle. And as we're texting for the address or whatever, he's like, "Oh, we're over here." And I've been to the town a few times. I think I'd visited you back in the day out there. And I started turning. I was like, yeah, I think this guy lives near the church.
Oh, yeah.
Well, like he literally is like on the same street. He's like
Oh, yeah.
basically almost across the street from like
Oh,
the
nice.
church. I was like, oh, that's fun. So we meet this guy. He comes back from work, and he showed me the car and whatever. And I was like, oh, I was like, he said, what do you do? And so I was like, oh, I work for the church, and opportunity to evangelize, bring
Oh,
Jesus.
yeah,
You never
yeah.
know, and maybe tell someone the gospel when you're buying a car.
Sure.
And I was like, I'm good friends with I know Father Dan pretty well. He just works at the church over there. And he's like, oh yeah, he's like, I chat with Father Dan like every week,
Okay.
he's been like, and yeah, it was pretty funny. And then I ended up taking him for like a little test drive, and my wife was hanging out, mass chatting to him in his driveway when I was testing it out, and he was like sharing his whole story, and yeah, it was like a little bit of like face sharing. It was like it's pretty neat. And so then we wandered over, and Father Dan was outside because it was beautiful out in his, wearing a nice little slacks and a shirt, and he was shoveling his driveway.
Oh, good for him.
Right? Because, the ice was melting. And
Yeah.
so then he was very nice and said, hey, you want to see the church? Because the kids haven't been in there, and
Okay.
got a little tour, and got a quick little visit with them. So yeah, that was fun.
Nice.
Yeah.
Great.
And we got a car. So there you go.
There you go. Very good. Although there also is in Corroborate, there's this surprisingly great Korean restaurant
I know.
in the town, and it's in the hotel. And often, like small town hotels are not the nicest. It's pretty small, not good to get a lot of use. There's this amazing Korean restaurant in the hotel, which you guys did not go to, I hear.
No, because I was texting you some stuff of like, what's the best highway? Because sometimes those highways aren't totally great, and it was actually pretty good. And then you gave us the heads up on the restaurant, and just with timing and 3 kids, and we realized that one of my kids maybe is motion sick in the car because he sat it was our buddy Ezra.
Mhm.
He sat in the back where he usually sits in the middle, and so he was kind of not feeling great, and we had to pick up gravel, and so we said no to Korean this time around.
Fair. Next time.
But next time, it's noted. It's in my phone.
But there's also a legendarily bad road from Bigger to Corroborate that is historically not the greatest, but it was not too. You took that way. You took the.
Yeah, I've done that a couple times before, but I couldn't remember which way. That's why I texted you.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's half an hour quicker or something like that. And my wife was like, I don't know with the kids, and I was like, we got to go there. We got things to do. But it was like pretty good.
Okay.
So I don't know if they've repaired. It was definitely not like rebuilt, but it wasn't like off-roading. But yeah,
good news.
But that was my adventure. Anything new or exciting with you?
Church, doing what we do. No, not a whole lot right now. I find like life gets a lot smaller with COVID, right? Just not doing a lot of stuff outside of ministry. So
just getting ready. I guess we're lots of conversations here of Lent and Easter and how we're going to do all that. And well, I guess we had Ash Wednesday, so you were pretty bored, right? Nothing going on.
That was a good day.
Yeah, pretty full. It was really fun to usher and see a lot of people coming, for ashes and communion, and there was quite a few people when they were signing the book and I was directing them, they were like, "Oh, we get both!" Like
Yeah.
it was like
Wow.
it's a two for
2 for
one.
1.
It was yeah, just really. I was really grateful that we could do that. It seems to be for whatever reason. I think it's obvious, but Ash Wednesday really speaks to people's hearts.
Oh yeah,
And
absolutely.
so I was very thankful that even in our creative way that we could still, honor that tradition as best as we could.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's great.
Yeah.
And we're doing similar things, I think, for Palms definitely, and then throughout the Triduum, doing as much as we can to give people chances to engage in the church this year as
Yeah.
much as possible. But to the Word of God last week on the homily.
Yeah, I want to talk about rock monsters. That'll make sense in a second.
Oh boy, yeah. So the one thing that I mentioned, I thought we would start with is this idea of these, like it says, it's from the second reading of this last weekend, from the letter of Peter, and he mentions Jesus, how when he was dead in the flesh but alive in the spirit. So after the crucifixion, before the resurrection, the letter of Peter mentions that he went to preach to the spirits in prison, and he mentioned these spirits were causing trouble in the time of Noah. And so I talked a little bit about what is going on there. So that we do it in a little more detail here to walk through the whole process of where this idea even comes from. And so number one, it does start, the origin of this idea is in actually the book of Genesis, at the beginning of the story of Noah. So I thought I would read a little bit to begin with. And part of the reason I want to get into this, I know for those who've been reading along with Father Mike Schmidt's The Bible in a Year podcast, which I do maybe a third of, honestly. I'm taking part, but not.
You can take a year and a half. You'll still get through it. It's fine.
Exactly. But I know that he mentioned this as well, and a few people have mentioned what he said about the beginning of the Noah story. So I'll just read the beginning here from Genesis chapter 6. When people began to multiply on the face of the ground, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that they were fair, and they took wives for themselves of all that they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in mortals forever, for they are flesh. Their days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God went into the daughters of humans, who bore children to them. These were the heroes that were of old, warriors of renown. And then it goes on to describe how the flood began. So that's an odd sort of passage, and one that often when we think about the Noah story, we don't consider that. But do you maybe want to walk through, like, what was Father Mike's interpretation of this, which I think is the best one to have, but there were others as well.
Yeah, so correct me if I get kind of silly, but so he approaches it in terms of lineage, right? So going back from Cain and Abel, and our first pronounced murder, I guess, in the Bible. There's sometimes shockingly some violence that plays out in human history, and so it would be that through the descendants of Seth, so coming from Abel, correct? Yes.
Well, Seth was another brother.
Yes, was the other brother.
Killed, they had Seth. And
yeah, so
Seth's line is sort of in a way, the good line.
Yeah, I was going to say righteous. I don't know the right term you would want to use, but of the line that it kind of is with God's blessing and kind of going, and so it's kind of this understanding potentially, Father Mike, of the intermixing of these lineages, right?
Yeah.
Which seems the most reasonable, probably, understanding.
Yeah. So in that understanding, then the sons of God would probably refer to the line of Seth and his descendants.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the daughters of humans would refer to the line of Cain and his descendants. And so that's the one interpretation of that, which is probably the most reasonable one. But there have been other interpretations in the past as well, and that's where this gets to what Peter is talking about in his letter. And so another interpretation was that these sons of God were sort of, in a way, spiritual beings, whether demons or something. And where that comes from is a couple of books that were popular around the time of Jesus, before and after, the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees. And they would kind of flesh out this beginning of the Book of Noah, and they were the ones who talked about this as being these spiritual beings that were causing trouble. And in these stories of Enoch and Jubilees, part of what happened in the flood was that these spirits were sort of captured or trapped as well, so that they couldn't cause trouble anymore. And it's a really interesting thing, because clearly it's not biblical teaching, not church teaching, but it's books written around that time just expanding on the story.
Yeah, and I guess we were talking beforehand where it's interesting, in that time, it obviously, comes into Peter, right? Is that happens even today and throughout human history, of other writings and influences of the time in the culture often will show up, or play out or get, so much so that it's prevalent that, Peter essentially speaks to it in some
Yeah.
shape, manner, or form. And yet, even that line of like the beans causing trouble, I was like,
Yeah.
what is that? What does that look like? And as much
Yeah.
as it's kind of fantastic and kind of unbelievable in some of these ways,
Mhm.
I could also, for me, anyways, I also see maybe why it took hold,
Yeah.
because the flood sometimes for me growing up seemed kind of over the top,
Mhm.
right? I was like, Lord, you couldn't like correct things a little simpler, right?
Yeah.
So maybe this understanding, it was like, oh, a bigger thing needed to be done because
Yeah.
there was more evil or bigger things at play that had to be handled.
Yeah.
So in that kind of context, that sometimes where I've looked at the flood, I was like, yeah, I could see why this story or understanding would maybe take
Yeah.
hold
As
for
it was
people.
there and it was prevalent is really the point here.
Yeah,
And even if anyone here has seen there's a Noah movie that came out a while ago. I think it was Russell Crowe
Russell
was the
Crowe
Noah.
was
Is that
Noah, I
right?
believe. Yeah,
And it was as often when people like when Hollywood makes movies about biblical stories, there's often controversy around there. And often that comes from they take the story, but then of course they flesh it out, and they add parts to it. And so in that movie of Noah, there are these rock monsters that are around at the time, and people were like, "That's ridiculous. There's a rock monsters in the Bible. Like, what is that?" It is true, they're not in the Bible, but where that did come from was actually from Enoch and Jubilees.
hmm
So in a way, that Noah story was taking seriously some of the larger stories that had been made around the Noah's Ark.
yeah, and
Yeah,
probably some editorial decisions of
oh
them
that too.
looking at other writings of their time and be like, "Wow, this is fantastic.
Yeah,
This would look
we can
great,
make this into a movie.
great, great on film."
Yeah,
And essentially, that's always like the danger sometimes of when we, interpret or present, some of the biblical history,
hmm
as we try to fill in the stories. I'm a big fan of like the Chosen TV series, but even that,
yeah,
like, which is pretty normal, but they have to fill in like, what does Jesus say when he's walking with the disciples? Like, so it's very minor stuff that they're like interpreting, but even then it's funny sometimes on their Facebook page of people getting angry of like,
oh yeah,
Peter would never say that, or Jesus, and like, it's holy speculation,
yeah.
and they
And
they try to do the best with it. But
I think there's room for that as long as we are clear about what is and is not the Bible and what
yeah,
is and is not church teaching. And those are the
yeah,
lines I was trying to draw with this whole conversation.
yeah, and it's important
Yeah.
to clarify them too, right? And even to go back to that story, which I liked, um, maybe more so than some of these Hollywood movies or that kind of stuff, is that like in the Chosen, when they get to a critical moment or in the Bible, like they basically, the dialogue is straight out of a translation of the Bible,
Oh,
right? So
okay.
it's like I was like, cool, like that
Yeah,
that
showing a lot of respect for
yeah,
the
and
word
they
of God
have
itself.
a whole kind of panel of scholars and theologians kind of helping them out. So,
hmm
but it's good even from the pulpit, on Sunday to speak into some of the. There's some weird and confusing things in the Bible,
Bible,
right?
yeah.
And a little bit of clarity can be very helpful.
And then, of course, the question is, well, why would Peter address these ideas that are seem so strange to us? And partly, like, he doesn't tell us, so it's just our best attempt. But partly, if that was on people's minds, right, that was their understanding, it's not a bad idea to address it. And also, one thing that does show that I mentioned in the homily is it's another way of driving home just the victory of Jesus and
Yeah.
where the victory came from, especially that his victory came from dying and rising, and that death is was a real thing, I
hmm
guess.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Frankly, it's like a power move. It's
yeah, in a
it's
way.
just showing of like Jesus doesn't save you just from your sin in the 21st century or this or that.
Mhm.
Like I'm even taking care of these potential spiritual beings that were going on or whatever.
Yeah,
Like it really is. He's the Lord of Lords. He's the King of Kings,
yeah,
right? That's part of the reason why it didn't come up in here. Well, I guess he is when he was talking about his dying and his rising in the series of Lent. Is I've really started to develop I don't know if love is the right term, but a lot of pondering and praying on the idea of the descent into hell, and
okay.
in that language of like what the triumph for Jesus does to accomplish, right? And to raise us
hmm
up when he is raised up. And, and even that conversation that's in Peter there, but also with the story of Noah and going in, this is the idea of we're preparing, while we celebrate the rite of election and going towards Easter, is this idea of, the powers of water from
hmm
destructive to blessing to purifying. And,
Yes, we're
yeah,
sort of moving here, I guess, from where we had been with is the Genesis story to what we really did today or the on the weekend. It was a really exciting thing was we had a right of election, and I guess the connecting line would be that we share in this victory of Jesus.
yeah.
And what Peter was mentioning was showing how real and powerful this victory of Jesus is. the right of election is our being drawn into that, our sharing in that. And so the way that it went, for those who weren't able to see it, we normally, for the rite of election, well, it's always something that we do for the adults who are going to be entering the church at Easter.
Hmm.
And technically, the elect are for those who are going to be baptized at the Easter field, not baptized yet. And normally that's done by the bishop. And we'd have a big gathering, usually on a Sunday afternoon in the cathedral.
Hmm.
And it'd be all the catechumens from around the diocese coming together to be welcomed by the bishop and be officially named the elect. Because of COVID, they did that differently. They gave us permission to do it personally, which is kind of exciting. Anytime I get to like do a bishop's liturgical job, I kind of like it. Like it doesn't happen often, but like I did confirmations this last summer, I did the
Yeah.
rite of elect this time. There's a beautiful thing to celebrate it in our parish,
Hmm.
and like these are the elect journeying to enter the church here in St. Anne's. And so what's it like? Because you were not able to be there in person, like a lot of people.
No,
But your family watched the rite at home, I believe.
yeah. So it was a home weekend for us. Luckily we're in person this weekend, but and it was beauty. There was like the stream glitch for a second. I was like, no.
Oh no.
But it rebooted just right before, so they got the homily and the rites, which I was like really excited for the kids to witness and myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we sometimes did it at other places, but because things are a little bit different, you did it with the rite this time, was hearing their stories.
Oh yeah.
The little
yeah.
testimonies like, Clark had shared that they had written, or they helped write, him and Trina write. I don't know how that all happens, but either way, it's just such a affirmation that God is still working and moving, and like my 10-year-old was like locked in.
Okay.
And really moved the story of like the children too. And
yeah, I think our youngest child we did the elect for there was one who was 8, I think.
Yeah, I forget their ages.
Right?
Yeah,
and then all the way up to adults. So yeah, it's the way that God calls people in all these different ages and all different backgrounds, but to Himself.
Yeah, it was just really beautiful, and we know some of them a bit more than others, and that's always great when you have a little personal connection to some of them. But just really affirming of the work of God and the desire in the human heart to know Him, and how that is expressed right in all their different stories. And it was a beautiful witness. I thought it was really cool that we were able to live stream that, and
I think too, for people to see that really even in COVID, the Lord is still calling people, because sometimes it can feel, even like I mentioned at the beginning, that life is almost a bit like on pause through this, or on a standstill. But that's not actually the case. Like life is still going, and the Lord is still calling people. Evangelization is still happening. People are still responding.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful thing for us to be able to see and celebrate.
And I think we all know that, but it's just very easy to be like, oh, COVID, oh, whatever, like to get kind of stuck in that. And so when we have these moments this is why I love the liturgical season anyways, that the wisdom of the church of having these different seasons that kind of draw our attention. But it works even that much better, kind of in the state that we're in. And focusing on, I think you were going to talk about just even the word elect, and how you spoke to that too, and to kind of ponder is, I think sometimes that's lost a little bit on.
Yeah, and that's, I think, our next thing we wanted to discuss is, so we have this rite of election, and we officially call those who are entering the church, they are the elect now. But the reason that they are the elect is that because all of us are, essentially.
Yeah.
So that's it. Like all of us that are called in Christ, we can use that word of all of us, but it's not a word we often use. Say, hey, I'm the elect, you're the elect. It's kind of, I don't know, is it uncomfortable language? And why are we uncomfortable with it sometimes?
1 second. We're back. There's going to be a slight cut there. The screensaver went on and I got paranoid. We stopped recording, but we're here.
Right.
You're asking if it makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah. Or like for me, it does. I was like, I'm comfortable like telling other people. And then one beautiful moment in the rite act is after they've all done their ritual, I say to them, the church now calls you the elect. And I love telling that to other people. But to say like, I'm the elect, I don't do that. And I would not be comfortable doing
that. Why? Can I ask you, like, what, like, it's probably the same reason I'll give, but.
Yeah, well, I guess it sounds pretentious. It really is.
That's totally
fair. About it.
I was good. Yeah. It was the last week or 2 weeks ago. I've talked about that a little bit too, of just the idea of being God's beloved or chosen, that often I struggle with the same thing. I'll tell somebody else that instantly.
Yeah.
But for me to believe that in the depths, that's where I often I doubt, right?
Hmm.
That I'm chosen, and that's part of the same this understanding of elect,
Yeah.
and I think for me on this word and kind of phrases, I've always just beholden it to um, RCA and the people
Hmm.
entering the church at Easter.
Yeah.
They're the elect,
Yeah.
and then they're just us.
No.
You're elect,
Yeah.
like I don't
Yeah.
know if anyone else does that, but that's kind of my brain. It's like they're elected to go and be received into the church, and to be
Mhm.
baptized. Like I used to always just narrow it to that,
Right.
but
Yeah.
really, you're right. This understanding is like we're all the elect. Like you
Yeah.
don't stop being elect. Like once
Yeah.
you're chosen, and you belong to God. And so yeah, it was kind of a good reminder on the weekend to be like, yeah, and
Yeah.
it even though I could sometimes fall, it's like, is it kind of pretentious or a bit of a
Mhm.
pride thing? But maybe I should stand a little taller, sit a
Mhm.
little taller, as my mom says, put my shoulders back. I
Yeah.
crouch all the time, but be like, know whose you are,
Yeah.
right? Like, look what God has accomplished for you, and
Yeah.
how He's proven His love for you. That I shouldn't be ashamed by that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's key. Like, first, to not be ashamed of it is key. And also, like, the reason that it's, I use the word pretentious. The reason that, in fact, it's not, and it shouldn't be a matter of pride to be, considered the elect, is a couple things. One is that it really does, like, it comes from our need for the Lord.
Mm.
Like, when I say that I'm a Christian, what I'm saying is I'm a sinner who needs saving. And when I say that I'm the elect, it's a similar sort of idea that God is calling us and saving us because we need to be saved. And God calls us not because of our earning it or our personal holiness, but because of his love and our need. So it's really is not a matter of, it shouldn't be a matter of pride. And also sometimes I think we can feel like there's an exclusivity in it, is that like
Mm.
we are chosen and those people aren't, right? Or I'm elect and you're not. But of course we know that in fact, like God does call all of us and he wants all of us to respond. And we are all, in that sense, everyone is the elect. But also by the elect, we mean those two who have responded and taken steps towards responding. And God wants us all to be that.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
and to live in that reality, in that relationship that is offered, right?
Yeah.
But that's a free choice. And what was kind of your tag? We're talking about the appeal commitment,
Oh yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Set me free, strive to live freely. I just see your notes here. Yeah, make me holy. I want to be holy.
Yeah.
And so it is kind of like when you're making that decision, you're standing abroad, right? Yeah, it's not this pride thing. It's saying like, I need you. I've talked about Lord, I need you. I love that song, but also
Mhm.
like, but my commitment of what I'm undertaking, right? What I'm going to step forward to do, and just as you were saying that part, and it's, I struggle sometimes in society that we doubt people's kind of intentions, right? And say
Mhm.
like, oh, you just want to come off as humble or whatever. And I noticed the beginning of Pope Francis' pontificate,
Mhm.
when he goes out on the balcony, asks people to pray for him and to pray with
Yeah.
them, right? And most people really love that. But
Yeah.
I saw some people who were like, I was like, oh, that's a total like hashtag humble brag. Like,
Oh,
just
oh
he's
really?
just
Wow.
like,
Yeah.
presenting that.
Mhm.
Or like in his first interview there, right? He's like, who is Jorge Bergoglio, right? And he's like, I'm a sinner.
Yeah.
And people are like, well, that's just a nice line. And I was like,
Mhm.
I'm not like, maybe he like
Maybe he means
legitimately
it. Yeah.
is aware of who he is and who he wants to be,
Mhm.
and that he has a need for God, understanding the need for God, right? And he's trying to witness that to us. Um, yeah, sometimes that my heart struggles that we just don't, uh, presume the good,
Yeah. It's like a lot
that
of cynicism. Is kind of what I'm.
that like
Yeah.
these people are authentically, radically, choosing Christ, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
yeah.
And that we are authentically, radically chosen by him
Hmm.
is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
This other line in here, as I remember, is weakness calls us to greatness.
Mhm.
It just kind of stuck with me, right? And
Oh.
that all connects in there of just uh my greatness, what we're called to, what this relationship God invites us into,
Mhm.
is going to be something great, not of my doing, um, but of, God's the first mover,
Yeah.
And I guess just to summarize, the right election where I hear is, again, going back to their stories to say
Yeah.
that God has been moving in their hearts. And I think there was one gentleman where it's like he was in RCA like a decade ago or something, and
Yeah,
then
I think so.
I don't know all the details, and then here he comes around. But to say like the Lord's been working for a while,
Yeah.
and isn't that true with all of us, right?
Absolutely. And a few others too. Like that's one great example of 10 years or so ago and then calling back again. And there are a few too, that we've been journeying with these people, some of them for 2 years or 3 years now.
Yeah.
So it's not just a matter of get on the track, take these classes, get baptized, but it really has been a real journey of faith. And this tells me that those who are taking this step are really taking it seriously. They're not just going through the motions, but they're journeying well and wisely and humbly with the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And he's taking them to this point.
Yeah. And it's, I go back to our kind of the mission statement or value statement. I don't know, whatever statement we have at parish, right? Of, encounter Jesus, grow as disciples, reach out in faith, love and service, reach out. And just the idea of like, that is always happening and growing. And like, and it's just, my heart was bursting on the weekend, to be honest. It was just awesome to see that. And then, Clark sharing, we got 51 people in faith studies, this women Bible studies getting going that my wife's a part of, and that's booming. And she's part of a women's retreat ministry that they're getting ready to launch. And like, it's just, I was like, like, come on, people. Like,
the Lord is still working.
The Lord is here and going. And, even in a goofy way, like getting our tax receipts or whatever, and you this maybe, I don't know if people open the envelope, but you wrote like a little letter, and even that was affirming. I was like, hey man, like God's up to stuff here, like
so kind of getting way off track with the readings, I suppose, but still good. But so in this letter, I was wanting to celebrate what we've been able to do this year, right? Both like because it was with the donations, especially notice financially, the support we've had to keep going, which has been wonderful and generous. And then I wanted to mention the ministry that we've done. And it turned into like a big paragraph, like half of the page of that. I didn't even mention all of it, but just the way the Lord has still been at work and we've still been able to minister throughout this year.
Yeah. And I guess I would say it's connected because a lot of that has been because the elect have been living as they've been called to live, right? And stepping up and continuing to live as disciples, and to fulfill the mission that they're being called into. And I mean, that's not just you or the staff, like that's so many volunteers and just the community itself, and that this is not just a checkbox kind of moment for some of our parishioners to go. It's to me, it was a clarion call to say like, how am I doing as the elect? How is Colm the elect, living that call, that Jesus is speaking into my heart here, and it's good stuff. And then maybe I'm going to do a watch party with my family of Noah and see if I like that movie any more or less. I don't know.
There's not 100% endorsement for Father Matthew, the Noah movie. It's worth watching. It's not the Bible story precisely.
That's fair.
But just be ready.
That's fair. Any other challenges, comments?
Yeah, well, the theme I'm trying to hit on, and I'll hitting it more next week, is this idea of building freedom. But it does call into refer to what we've been saying as well. That in our elect, in our being chosen by God, called by God, he calls us into this freedom to love, freedom to serve. And so let's keep building that.
Sounds good. And if you weren't here on Sunday or heard the homily, we have a little billboard tree. And so we're inviting you to come spend some time with the Lord again, and you can pin a little leaf, and we'll have our tree of life as we approach Easter. It's already filling out a little bit, which is exciting. So I'm going to go get some time with the Lord here, and we'll move on, and we'll see you next week, I guess.
Great. Thank you.
See you, everybody.